Each year in sports, records are shattered and championships are won, but the highly paid analysts get to tell you what to think about it. Who's listening to us, the fans?
This is Talk Back, where real fans get to express their own opinions and engage in heated debates about the world of sports as we see it. Welcome to the show. It's time for another edition of Talk Back. It's the final episode of Season 1. Justin and I are in the studio tonight. It's Wednesday night before tip-off of the NBA games as the playoffs roll on. Justin, we have a lot to talk about in the playoffs over the last couple of days. Even since our last episode, there's been a ton going on. We've had the Cavs-Pacers Game 7 happen. Now we're into some of the newer series. We've got Boston rolling on, which we didn't really think was going to happen. And then, of course, the biggest story coming out of the last week was the NFL Draft. All of that and more on this episode of Talk Back.
Well, it's time for segment 1 here on our last show of season 1. And as Eric talked about in the opener, it has been a wild week of action in the NBA and really the NFL draft since our last podcast drop. So let's talk about what is going on in the NBA. And Eric, for you, it's been really emotional because you had the Cavs going from a potential scenario where they could have got bounced in the first round for the first time in LeBron's career. Sixers go into round 2. They don't look very good in their opening game to a tough game on LeBron on opening night in round 2 for him in Toronto. But let's take a step back to Game 7. Something that bothered me in this game, before we even talk about it, was the fact that ABC had this game as 1 o'clock on a Sunday. I thought that was just such an odd time when you start to think about the NBA, really that they've kind of had that prime time look throughout the playoffs. Every game is always, 7, 8 o'clock, and you get the 9:30 or 10:30 start for the late game. But I know it got a good rating, but I felt like it was such a weird time to put a Game 7 with LeBron James on at 1 o'clock on a Sunday.
I think that was their only saving grace, was the fact that it was a Game 7 with LeBron James, and you either have one faction of fans that's, like me, rooting that he would continue on, and another faction of fans that's tuning in to see if he's going to be done in the first round. Justin, I kind of agree with what you're saying there in the sense that if you look throughout the playoff schedule, one thing that's bothered me, and I know some of them are West Coast problems, but you've got games starting at 10:30, 10:45, and they're pretty good games, a lot of them. A lot of Pelicans games, a lot of Warriors games, some of the Spurs games. They were on so late, unless we stayed up till 1:30, 2 a.m. on the East Coast, we didn't see those games finish. Meanwhile, they've got some random start times on the East Coast of 7 p.m. for some of these games. I missed some of the Boston games early on because as I wanted to watch them, it's like they're on at 7 o'clock. Even the Sixers, some of those games. And then they hide this Game 7 in the middle of a Sunday afternoon. We were just getting home from church. Then we were also tuning into the NASCAR race at Talladega. We're not going to get into that action here on this show, but that was one of the things I had on my schedule of things from a sports perspective to do on Sunday. And I'm like trying to figure out on my iPad and then my phone and then my TV how I'm going to balance all these things because I wasn't going to miss LeBron in a Game 7.
Well, even that, if you think about, I understand the East Coast, West Coast audience at night, and obviously for those fans in California, they don't want to start the game at 6 o'clock there because with traffic, it could be tough getting fans to the arena. So I understand starting it at 7, 7:30, it just stinks for us on the East Coast. But to have a Game 7 on a Sunday at 1, to me, it felt like a lot of times they'll do those games at like a 3:30 or a 5:30. They only had 2 games that day, and it felt like both of them sort of got lost in, the fact that on the East Coast, we had nice weather. Nobody really wanted to be stuck inside. And I can't imagine that Jazz Rockets got a very good number as early as that game was coming on right after the Cavs game. But that's for another time, for another discussion. I guess in the offseason, maybe we can talk about the NBA schedule. Let's talk about what we saw on the court, because there was a real chance, Eric, at some points in this game, especially late when the Pacers started to make a run. I know the one point that made you nervous was about a minute to go in the third quarter. LeBron's heading to the locker room, and we're texting back and forth of what is happening here. Ends up being that he was cramping up, so they were probably getting him some fluids back there. I thought at that point, depending on when he was coming back, that there was a real chance there that the Cavs could be in trouble. But ultimately, the beleaguered guys on this team, the guys that really didn't show up games 1 through 6, came through, took a lead from 2 to 9. Pacers never could really cut into it at that point. But having watched this Cavs team, is this the most nervous you've been since LeBron's Heat days about him getting to an NBA Finals?
I'd have to say yes. And, there's going to be a lot of people I've already been in arguments with, either on Twitter or local friends. Even you sometimes, Justin, we go bantering back and forth with how much of this can be attributed to LeBron James, the beast mode that he's been in throughout the season and the end of the series here with the Pacers. Actually, the whole series he played well, but, he really took over and had that will to win in that Pacers series versus there's a lot of people that want to tell me, well, there's no way this can be the worst roster he's ever been on. And by the names on the back of the jerseys, it's not. It's not the worst roster he's ever been on. No way. Not even close. But there's a difference between the names on the jerseys and what they give you on the floor. We've talked about that a few months ago with regards to Tristan Thompson. His name and his value, his salary is way higher than what his performance on the floor has been. So parlay that into these playoffs. I'm sorry, but Nance, Clarkson, Love, Smith, all good names on the back of those jerseys, but the numbers haven't been there, particularly in their shooting efficiency, and that's why you've seen LeBron need to take over these games. However, it was phenomenal to see them come through in that spot, particularly Kevin Love. I know he has struggled in the last series, but he really came through. A couple of huge threes in the moments that LeBron was sitting on the bench, eating orange slices, drinking Gatorade. Apparently the IV wasn't something that they had time to do when LeBron went back, so I don't know if he went back there and took a dump or I don't know what he was doing. But look, the fact is he needed a rest. He was just totally out of gas. He came back. They held it together long enough to where he could put in those final 6 to 7 minutes and will them to victory one more time. It makes me pretty nervous, though, heading to Toronto.
I was more nervous after the game. Seeing him at that post-game press conference, I mean, he looked like he was exhausted. He looked like he just played Game 7 of the finals and was just like had a grueling series and just wanted to go home. Not something we normally see from him in the first round. But you had to feel pretty good about what you saw last night. First game, they go up to Toronto, really off a short rest. And as a team, they played a lot better. Actually, LeBron had one of his worst shooting percentages, really probably of his playoff career. He only was 12 of 30 from the floor. But the other guys finally came through for them. I know that had to make you feel a little bit better in the fact that they went into Toronto, took home court advantage back, and are now up 1-0.
I think what made me feel the best about it, though, Justin, is that to start the game after the first quarter, the remainder of the team, not named LeBron James, was like 6 for 22. Their efficiency was really bad, and LeBron had a hot start, 5 of 7 or 5 of 8, something like that. Now, LeBron started to really fall off. It was definitely one of his worst shooting games of the year. Probably of his playoff career, like you said. So what impressed me was the fact that when they needed that team the most, they finally showed up. They finally were making buckets. J.R. Smith was just raining threes. Korver put in a bunch. Love hit some. Then you had Clarkson playing well. It's funny, you didn't see Nance on the floor at all because Thompson had a good game, a double-double out of Tristan Thompson. I don't know what it is about the playoffs.
Why don't you feel they've played him more earlier in that Pacers series? Because the Pacers really dominated him on the inside with really Turner and Thaddeus Young. Yeah. And then all of a sudden they stick Tristan in Game 7.
I don't know.
And he has a double-double for him. Why weren't they playing him? Is his head that messed up from this whole Kardashian thing?
It very well might be. I mean, we've got baby mama drama. We've got, I don't know what's going on with that because the Cavs have used so many different lineups throughout the year. So I basically chalked that Pacer series up and how they used Tristan Thompson to the fact that Tyronn Lue, I know I joked about it on a couple weeks ago and said maybe about 700 different rosters. The reality is
close.
They did use a little more than 30 lineups for this season. And so I think you just have more and more experimentation. Whatever reason Tyronn Lue thought Tristan Thompson didn't match up well with the Pacers, I'm more side with you that for whatever reason it is in Tristan Thompson's career, the only time he ever earns the money that he gets seems to be from April on. The rest of the season, that past couple years, he has proved to be not even close to worth that money. But in the playoffs, giving you a double-double in a game against Toronto where you really needed those defensive rebounds or those tip-outs and those second chances on offense, like I said, especially in the times LeBron was falling flat in the second and third quarter, had the cramp issues, I am very thankful. But Justin, walk us through the end of that game because really the Raptors blew a lead. They blew that game, essentially, if you're talking about the
sure.
Regulation period. The Raptors blew that game. Then you go to overtime. Actually, LeBron almost made a miracle shot. I mean, wouldn't that have actually been more heartbreaking than going to overtime and losing? I think that would have been a dagger.
I think he would have been arrested for breaking some noise ordinance in Pennsylvania if that had happened.
Yeah, because I had already been screaming at LeBron for some of the dumb things that he was doing that were really irritating me. And like he even admitted in the postgame, it was probably one of his worst performances of the year. But then they go to overtime. The Cavs get up by 6. They even have possession with up by 6 with like 3.5 minutes to go. And it's like, control the clock, take your shots. They fell right back into ISO ball, including LeBron James. LeBron took some horrible shots in overtime. I was yelling at LeBron, yelling at my TV. The fact is, the Cavs then blew it. The game almost shifts back to the Raptors in overtime. And then, Justin, they make a whole mess of it again at the end of overtime. I really, really can't believe the Cavs walk away with a victory in that game.
No, Toronto has to feel absolutely demoralized after this. All this build-up, they're the number 1 seed. They finally get a home game. They've been resting. The Cavs come off of a gauntlet of a series in the first round.
Yeah, Cavs just played. Remember, they just played a couple days ago.
On Sunday. At 1 o'clock on Sunday. We just talked about it. And now, like 2 days later, they're having to fly to Toronto and play this team that's been waiting for them and has built all this stuff about wanting to beat them. And then the Raptors go 3 for 18 from the floor down the stretch. And we were texting back and forth through the game, and I really thought, up until about 3 minutes to go in regulation, it was a very well-played game between both teams. Statistically speaking, no one had really killed each other. It wasn't like Toronto or the Cavs had shot the lights out of the gym from 3 or any of these crazy things. It looked like it was just a good basketball game back and forth. And then the Raptors lost their mind. They could not make a shot. You've got Van Fleet, who basically looked like his shoulder was out of socket. He's taking threes late in the game in regulation and in overtime. Like, if you're Dwayne Casey, that's the best you can come up with. You've got Lowry and DeRozan and all these other three-point shooters in Miles on your team, and that's what you come up with. I just thought it was Toronto just blew that game down the stretch. And we talked about even with the Pacers, when you're playing the Cavs and you're playing someone like LeBron, as smart as he is and as cerebral as he is, you can't make mistakes and give up like empty possessions and do dumb things. I mean, even the play with LeBron gave them a chance. I think there was 40 seconds on the clock. LeBron ran it down, got double teamed and kind of threw it off the backboard, had a shot clock violation and gave Toronto a chance.
That was the worst shot.
And then DeRozan breaks down Tristan off the dribble, gets into the paint, but he drives too far to his right into a double team instead of just pulling up for a little runner 10 feet away and then kicks it out to Van Fleet. Yeah, he was open, but he was just sitting on a bench with a heating pad on his shoulder. Like, you've got to know the situationally, Cleveland's not going to guard a guy. That's why he's open, because they don't trust that he's making shots. So I thought I really think that Toronto has an opportunity. They could be swept in this series. I think from what happened in 2016, what happened in 2017, they got swept last year. All this buildup for this team, they've been waiting for the Cavs, and to lose in your building in that fashion, I think that Cleveland is probably going to win game 2. And if that's the case, I could easily see them going back home to Cleveland and take care of business. I'm that down right now on the Raptors because the Raptors lost a chance to really set the tone for this series and go up 1-0 and change the tenor of what has happened between that rivalry. Now they're down. They're going to be pressing in game 2. If they fall behind, you're going to see them go right back to what they did. Isolation ball with DeRozan and Lowry. And if those guys don't shoot the lights out of the gym, it's going to be game over. They're going to be down 2-0.
Well, I got to say one thing before we wrap up the Cavs. I know I could talk LeBron all night, Justin, but as you said, I really thought in the last 10 seconds of OT, Toronto's going to come down. And like you said, they kicked it out to Van Fleet. You got to make that 2-pointer. And if nothing else, draw the foul, go to the line, make 2 foul shots, and you still win the game. So really bad decision-making there. But I got to give credit to LeBron in the sense that, let's back it up just a minute here, because the game happened after we aired last week and I didn't have a chance to react to it. But game 5 of the Pacers series, when LeBron is the hero, I know there was some goaltending. I know there was a big shot on the line. I know there was a lot going on there. And I'm not going to sit here and say that LeBron should take the last shot for the fate of the world or anything like that. No, I would rather have Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant taking that shot than LeBron James. But listen, he makes that shot in game 5. He runs over. He jumps on the podium in Cleveland, puts his arms up. The fans are embracing him. I actually thought in that moment, and it's something that's sort of counterintuitive to what I've said about him going to Philly or him going to a larger market on the East Coast, maybe the Knicks. he's in a position now where you look at that Pacers series, you look at game 5,